Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. In this audio presentation, we're going to continue our conversation about the lean startup. We've already talked a little bit about assumptions and hypotheses and the basic information about experimentation. We're going to deepen that understanding now and then move on to the topic of the minimum viable product. The best experiment gets the maximum amount of actionable information about customer purchasing behavior with the minimum amount of time, money, and effort. This is an absolutely essential point to understand. We're trying to get the information that we need as quickly and as cheaply as possible, but it needs to be actionable information. If you're collecting data that you can't actually use to make a decision, then you probably don't need that data at all. So let's do a little bit of an activity here. A survey is one form of an experiment in which you ask for information and thoughts from potential customers. So go into the Canvas activity and imagine creating a survey to inform your planning for the t-shirt project. Come up with a question that you could ask a potential customer that would help you maybe with your design creation or your sales plan or something else associated with the project. Try to think about what a good question would be that would actually be helpful. And there's a quick example in the Canvas activity that shows you what an example of a terrible question. So take a moment to do that right now. I strongly recommend pausing this presentation to go and do that because you'll get the most out of this by using the information interactively here. We want to think a little bit about how to generate good survey or interview questions. So first, you always want to ask questions that are more factual than opinion. And you want to ask questions that aren't going to trigger selective memory issues. So for example, let's imagine that you thought you wanted to create an app that would access weather data, which is freely available, and then that would give your users information about which clothes that they should wear. So you could ask your potential customers, would you use a weather app to determine clothing choices? But this question is highly problematic. First of all, you're asking them about something they've probably never seen or used before, which means they're speculating about what it would do or how it would work. And second of all, you're asking them to predict their behavior in the future. And so this is going to be subject to all sorts of biases about how they see themselves, what they think they do as compared to what their actual behavior is. A much better question would be something like, how often do you check the weather before picking out your clothes? So this asks people to actually report their behavior, and that's going to be a much better indicator of what they actually do. You also need to watch out for sample bias. Are the people who have access to the survey or the time to do the survey or potentially attracted by survey compensation, are they the right target? This is a particular problem with online surveys where you often have very little control over who actually takes the surveys. Always test your surveys live before moving to online. You need to know that your questions actually work and make sense and that your participants understand them, because if you go to online and you get 100 or 1,000 responses and then suddenly realize that one or more questions don't actually work the way you expected, you run the risk that some, if not all, of the data you've already collected is invalid, or that it can't be effectively integrated with any future data you collect with an improved question. The reality is that actions speak louder than survey answers. It's a basic truth of the human condition that people lie. The only variable is about what. My favorite example of this is something that's been studied extensively in the literature, which is in the United States, primary care physicians are generally expected to ask their patients at annual checkups how much alcohol those patients drink per week. And the amazing thing is that the research shows over and over and over again that when doctors ask patients this question, and of course doctors are only asking this in order to try to be helpful and to improve the patient's overall health, but the research shows that people consistently lie. They lie to their doctor about how much alcohol they drink. And if you think about it, I bet you can guess whether when they lie, they overestimate how much they drink or they underestimate how much they drink. And the answer, of course, is that they underestimate how much they drink. They misreport the amount of alcohol they drink by around 30 to 50%. So that is, if they drink 5 drinks a week, they report only 3 of them. And this is because we know as American adults that alcohol is not necessarily good for us. It has its purpose, of course, but we feel embarrassed about how much alcohol we drink, and so we report less, even though it's to our own detriment to misreport this kind of information to our physicians. And these are the kinds of things that we need to take into consideration as we're designing surveys and collecting information in order to understand which hypotheses and assumptions about our startups are correct or incorrect. And again, the other critical aspect of this is getting information from the right people. You've got to track down potential customers and experts who are going to evaluate your opportunity objectively. It's great to tell your parents about your business idea, but you can't really expect them to give you unbiased feedback. Perhaps they will, but that's really probably not your best target. So, a number of things to remember. Talk to your customers earlier rather than later. One of the biggest challenges that I've run into with entrepreneurs is they come to me to talk to me about an idea, and when I ask them how many customers they've spoken to, they say none. And when I ask them why not, they sometimes say, well, I don't want anyone to steal my idea. My response to that is that if your idea is so fragile, if it is so easily stolen that you can't afford to talk to customers about it, then you don't have a business in the first place. Try to answer the greatest risk questions first. What are the big things that you really, really need to know that would tell you whether or not this idea will work? Try to run affordable tests that confirm your market or customer. The classic lean startup goal is to talk to at least 100 potential customers. As we've said over and over and over again, get out of the building, stop working at your desk, go out and talk to people to find out whether this is actually going to work. One key way to do testing beyond surveys is prototyping. You want to focus on key aspects you need to test and provide the customer with something that they can test that isn't the finished product. You need to be creative in the tools you use. This is often a very frightening sort of moment for entrepreneurs, is to take something that they know is not really the final product and put it in front of the customer. We talk about this as being the prototype mindset, and the reading that you looked at in Sprint suggests a number of ways to think about this. One, you can prototype anything. Not all prototypes are going to be the same depending on the industry you're in and the type of technology, but anything is theoretically prototypable in one form or another, even if it's just on paper. Prototypes are disposable. You're not going to keep these forever. Your goal is to build just enough to learn, but no more. And then the effect or use of the prototype should appear as close to the use case as possible. Now that can be really, really challenging in some industries like biotechnology, but your goal is to try to figure out as closely as possible how customers actually purchase and use your product or idea. So real briefly, I want to show you an example. The Here product was developed and run on a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign. Ultimately, this business is now gone. It was not ultimately successful, but I do want to show you sort of the process that they went through. The idea behind it was to put a small computer, a mic, and a speaker into a hearing aid that would allow the user to customize how they hear. So it would be adjusting the sound in real time, and the user would be able to make adjustments to that based on where they were and the situation. And because everyone who has hearing problems has slightly different hearing problems, they wanted this to be fully customizable. So how did prototyping actually look? Well, at the beginning, it was a fairly clunky sort of thing. You can see up in the upper right the digital signal processing technology. That's all got to be linked together to a monitor. They then moved down, if you look at the lower left, to this ear simulator audio testing, where they actually had a little mock-up of a human ear so that they could see and test what the device actually was producing and how the sound was transmitted. Miniaturizing this kind of technology is not obvious and making it all work at once. And so here we have in the bottom center the Franken here, where they actually had some of the key components of the technology which couldn't quickly be miniaturized attached to the person's hat so that they could have the one part of the technology that was ready to be put in the person's ear use the computing power of the boards, and they could actually test this out. And then finally, ultimately the bottom right, when everything was miniaturized and finalized, the final form factor where it's just the earbud piece. This is a fantastic example of prototyping. As I said, ultimately this company was not successful, but I think that the process that they went through here shows exactly the approach that you might want to use when you're trying to bring a technology and see how customers actually are likely to use it. Some of you may be interested in technologies that are more app related. Just because you're working on an app doesn't mean you can't prototype. You can create wireframes. Here was an example of a wireframe that could be put in front of customers to see what would they click on, where is their attention drawn. Obviously quite different than where the final design eventually went to, but these are really useful ways of putting ideas in front of customers and getting their feedback about what does and doesn't work. Another possibility for a form of prototyping is a landing page for a website. So sometimes a marketing effort can direct your customers to a potential landing page. Even if your landing page doesn't have absolutely everything functional yet, it still can have a call to action, that is, to tell them what to do next. It can provide information about price choices. It could ask for an email address. It could say something like, we don't have this product 100% ready yet, but please enter your email address and we'll get in touch with you as soon as we're ready to go. And it potentially could take orders, even if it can't fulfill those orders right away. And so you might ask yourself, did your t-shirt website do any of these that you created as part of this as part of the project? So this is all providing useful information, hopefully, to you about this experimentation process. We're going to go into one last area of experimentation called A/B testing, and then move on to talk a little bit about the minimum viable product.